Welcome everybody to our Fair Isle class on this Monday afternoon. I hope you're all wide awake and ready to learn after the time change. Hope you've got some extra coffee in you. My name's Claire. I'll be hanging out in the chat, answering your questions there or forwarding them on to Darren so he can demonstrate for us. Darren is of course your teacher there on stream, working his modeling skills to show off the hat. We're going to learn the basics of how to work Fair Isle, and then after the class, you'll have all the skills you need to make the hat he's showing there. And I'll be putting the handout in the chat in case you need to get that as well again. Now that that's done, we'll let Darren take over.
All right, welcome to class. And we've got a lot to cover today. So there's a lot of information in for Fair Isle knitting. So I'm going to cover as much as I can. And hopefully when you're done with the class, we will be ready to start this hat. And we're going to review the pattern and kind of go through it and give you all the skills you need to make this hat. So we want to go ahead and jump right in. Let's switch to the view of my hands and we will get started. And we're going to talk a little bit about Fair Isle and some things that you're going to need to know to get going. All right. Is it on the view of my hands? Is that the main view?
Yes.
Okay. So when you're selecting your colors for your Fair Isle project, very, very important that you select colors that have a strong contrast. So like this red and white have a very strong contrast. And so you can really see your design and it really stands out nicely for you. So you want to make sure that the colors are contrasting. So like red and green or like purple and yellow would be good combinations. Like orange and blue really contrast each other very nicely. But you also want to make sure that the level of saturation of color in the yarn you select is also different. So think of like black and white, how the level of saturation is very, very different. Like maybe like a pale green and a dark green or a dark brown or something would be a contrast. So I've knitted up this swatch to show you what it looks like if you are not getting a good contrast. So at first, I knitted down here this dark gray with this burgundy, and you can see it, but it does not give you a strong contrast. And if you knitted your entire hat like that, you might be disappointed at the end. And then so as I moved up, I changed it from dark burgundy. I did gray with a bright red. And so this bright red and gray show up much better. So you're getting a much better contrast. You're actually going to see what your work looks like. And then I changed it again. I changed it to red and this light blue. And that's going to give you the strongest contrast. So depending on if you want it to be, maybe you want it to be super subtle. So that might be just what you want. Or maybe you want it to be like this, or you want a real strong contrast. So that's what you will decide. So it's very important when you're thinking about making a Fair Isle project that you do a swatch. And I know people hate the sound or the thought of doing a swatch. But a couple of things the swatch will tell us. First of all, it does give you information about your gauge, so it can help you decide what needles you want to use. Sometimes when you're working with Fair Isle with stranded knitting, the strands in the back can become very tight and it can actually affect your gauge a little bit. So it might be a little tighter. So it's nice to know that before you start. But also very important, it tells you, do I like these colors together? Like if you get halfway through the hat and you realize that you've chosen the wrong colors, you might be really disappointed. So this way it gives you the information, not just about the gauge of your stitches, but do I like working with this yarn? Does this yarn look good with the colors I've chosen? Do I enjoy working this chart? Maybe you don't, maybe you're going to get into that chart and realize, oh, I don't even like this chart. Why do I want to make this hat? So this is all information that you get before you start by doing a swatch. So I do encourage everyone to do a swatch. When you knit in the round, however, you have to knit a swatch that's based on knitting in the round. When you knit stockinette stitch in the round, you only use knit stitches to create your stockinette stitch. So if you knit your swatch flat, you're going to be using knit stitches on one side and purl stitches on the other side to create your stockinette stitch. Now the purl stitch is just slightly looser than the knit stitch. When you make a purl stitch, it's just slightly looser. So if you knit your swatch flat, you're not going to get the same gauge in stockinette stitch as if you knit it in the round. So it is going to be off. It's not going to give you an accurate gauge. So one way to do that is you cast on stitches on a double pointed needle, and then you knit all the way across. And on the back, you just leave these great big long strands in the back. You don't do anything with them. You bring your working yarn back to the right side of your work, you knit it across, and then you bring your working yarn back to here. So that way you're creating your stockinette stitch just by making knit stitches. And it's going to simulate what your gauge would be by knitting in the round. And because this is just a practice swatch, it doesn't matter that we have these long strands in the back. And if you don't leave them long enough and it starts to curl, you can go ahead and just cut them and tie them in little knots like I did here. You just cut them. So this is a good way to create a swatch for knitting in the round or for Fair Isle to determine what type of colors that you should choose. Another way to do it is if you take a picture of your two colors side by side with your phone and then change it to black and white. If there's a strong contrast between them, even in black and white, then that's a sign that it will actually probably have a good contrast. Anything to add, Claire? Any other questions?
I think those are both good tips.
No questions about the swatch. Put that forward there.
This might pertain to the swatch, but it's probably also just for general fair knitting. Asha wants to know, do we have to keep cutting yarn on every change of color, or do we carry it always?
Well, so in this one, with this, I'm just using these two colors. I didn't have to cut them because I'm using each color. Sometimes I'm using just the white in a row or in a round, and sometimes I'm using just the red in a round, but it's just one round, or maybe here's two rounds. So you're just going straight up. You're not trying to take it up too far. I think a good rule is if you're going more than like an inch or an inch and a half, you should probably cut it. What do you think, Claire? Like, is there a rule about that or not? You don't want to go too far.
I mean, there's probably no hard and fast rule because there's not really a lot of those in knitting. But yeah, I'd say a good guideline is probably no more than an inch and a half, trying to carry the color up the inside.
Yeah, so as long as you're just doing it like this, you'll be fine. Now in this swatch, or in this hat here that I was working on, I used different colors to show the different kind of contrast you can get. And so like down, so I had to cut these because I'm not really repeating them. So I don't know if that's helpful or not. Like here, up here, I have the white that I used, and I used white way down here. So I wouldn't carry my white all the way up. So I cut the white, wove in the end, and then rejoined the white up here. So if that's an example of what the question was. But usually you probably don't have to cut your yarn and rejoin. Probably most of the time in Fair Isle. Okay. Anything else? But that's something you could manage to find out in your swatch. If you knit a big enough swatch, then you can see how many rows it's going to take before it would be too much to carry up the side. So that could relate to the swatch. Anything else?
Nope, we're ready to move on.
Okay, so for this hat, we're going to knit in the round. So quickly, I want to touch on how to join your work for the round. So you cast on your stitches, whatever your pattern calls for. You make sure that they're lined up perfectly nicely and that there are no twists. You don't want it to be twisted. So just double check and make sure they look perfectly nice. And then you're going to put your stitch marker on to mark the beginning of your round, which I don't usually do. I usually just let the tail mark the beginning or the end. And you want to make sure that your working yarn is coming from the right-hand side. And then you just start knitting in pattern as normal. And what's going to happen is you've joined your work. So you've joined your work in the round. So you can see right here, it's joined by that strand. And if you're going to do knit 2, purl 2, rib, so you do your purls. You have to stop, make a full stop, reposition your yarn. So you want to take your yarn in between your needles to do your 2 knits. So do 2 knits, full stop, open your needles, bring your yarn in between your needles, and now you're in the position to do as many purls as you need to for the pattern. And so this is just a real quick review on how to knit ribbing and how to join in the round. So with knitting in the round, what you want to remember is you're always knitting on the front of your work. You're never turning it to knit on the back of your work. And you want to, I'm not going to knit this whole round because it would take too long. So you're just going to knit all the way around. And when you get to right before your stitch marker, you do want to stop here and just give it another look, because at this point, it could still twist in your hand because it's only connected by that one string. And so it kind of acts like a hinge. So you could have had it twist in your hand when you weren't paying attention. So you just want to make sure that you are not twisted. So lay it out, double check right here. And when you start that second round, when you knit that next stitch to start the second round, then you're kind of locked in place. You're either twisted or not twisted. So you want to make sure you've got it right. So nobody told me that when I started knitting in the round. And I would always double check to start, and then sometimes it would still end up twisted. And that's what I was doing. That second join, that second round was throwing me off. So any questions about joining in the round and knitting in ribbing, how to knit ribbing? Any questions about that, Claire?
I'll ask it here so people not in the chat can see too. How do you know which side is going to be the inside of the hat or the sweater or the sock or whatever?
Well, usually, so I'm working right here. So this is usually going to be the outside, what I'm working on. But, you know, you can turn it inside out and work on it as well. So, but usually what you're looking at right here, that's usually the outside, right, Claire? Am I missing something or am I not?
Yes, as long as you have the needle tips closest to you and the cord sort of going away at the back, then you'll be looking at the outside.
Okay, so that's, I just want to make sure I was explaining that correctly. So, okay. So
any tips for making sure there's no gap or like space where you've joined in the round?
The way I do it is when you knit, so I do have a gap there because I kind of stretched it to show you. But if you see what happens when you stretch it, so you see how that stitch is getting stretched. So what I do when I'm knitting in the round is, I'll show you here. So pretend I'm just joining. So pretend I'm just joining. When I knit the first stitch, I pull mine just a little more tight than I normally would. And then when I knit the second stitch, again, I pull it just a little more tight than I normally would so that there's not any slack that's going to be able to move back into that gap. And then you can do that again when you get to the end. Like you could maybe knit these last two just a little bit tight, and then the first. Now I'm not talking about doing anything extreme. We're not trying to do anything crazy. We're just knitting them a little bit more snug than we normally do, just a little. And then also, if you're going to end up with a bit of a gap because it wasn't really joined, you know, like right here, you're going to end up with a little bit of a gap. But that's when you weave in this end of your tail, you can kind of, if you do end up with a gap there, you can use that tail to kind of sew it closed. What tricks do you have, Claire? Do you know any other fancy tricks?
I typically just use the tail to close up any gaps. I know some people, and someone suggested in chat too, you cast on an extra stitch and then sort of like knit the last and the first stitch together, but sometimes I forget to do that and then I have an extra stitch. So
yeah, I've heard about doing that, but I've never done it. I just knit it a little bit tighter and then use the tail to close up any gap, and it seems like it's fine. So But whatever works for you, whatever method you like, that's the best part about knitting. There's so many ways to accomplish the same thing that you can pick and choose which ones are going to be better suited for you and your personality and your techniques. Okay, anything else?
We're about 15 minutes into class, so I want to make sure we cover all the Fair Isle stuff.
Okay, moving
For
along.
just general knitting in the round, we might have another class coming up soon. So if you have general knitting in the round questions, check our schedule.
We have had classes, so if you search for past classes, you can find them. All right, so I'm going to show you how to join a new color. So we're ready to start our Fair Isle. So we're going to join our new color, and I'm going to show you how to do that. We're going to talk a little bit about our floats and what that means, and then we're going to look at the chart, and we're going to start reviewing the actual pattern. Now we're ready to get started. So just for sake of argument, let's just say I'm going to knit with my white yarn. I'm going to knit 2 stitches with my white yarn. And now I'm going to add this orange yarn. And I know there's so many people that come up with so many fancy and complicated ways of joining a new yarn, but I don't like to do fancy and complicated things. So what I do is I just take my new yarn, just hold the tail. You want to leave a tail long enough to weave in your ends for finishing. So leave about 5 or 6 inches or 4 inches. Hold your yarn where you need it to be if it were attached. So if this was your working yarn, where would this yarn be? So if I'm going to knit, my yarn should be here. If I'm going to purl, my yarn should be here. So I'm just going to knit. Just hold your yarn where it should be to work with. Just pretend it's attached and just start knitting with it. So I'm going to knit, say, 3 stitches with the orange. And that's all you do to attach a new color. You don't do anything fancy. You don't, what do you, I mean, Claire, do you do anything fancy or what do you do there?
Nope, that's all I do.
But I've seen videos where people, they have all kinds of suggestions, but I just want to keep things as easy as possible. And you can go ahead and you can tie, you can kind of maybe tie it in a snug little bow so you don't like have loose stitches if you want to, or, but that's really all you do. So when you start knitting, so I've knitted with my white, now I've knitted with my orange. I'm going to pick up my white and start knitting with my white again. So what you want to make sure of, and this is very important, because my white was 3 stitches back, when I start knitting with it again, I'm going to have this strand of yarn behind my work that's not going to show. It's going to be in the inside, going behind those orange stitches. You can see that. Can you see that clearly? I'm trying to. So the white is going to go behind the orange stitches. And you want to make sure that you're leaving plenty of slack so that those orange stitches have plenty of room to kind of, just be there and not be crowded. If you pull it too tight, then those stitches are going to be all smushed together and you're going to end up with work that's really kind of puckery. And also, a strand of yarn is not so stretchy. So if you're pulling it very, very tight, you might even make this hat so tight that you can't even fit it on your head. So what you want to do is just very gently start knitting with the white. So I'm going to knit 3 stitches in the white. So after you knit your first stitch, one thing I kind of do is maybe just kind of pull down a little bit, and that gives it a little slack. Maybe kind of stretch them out a little bit on your right hand needle, so that way you're not smushing them. And then just don't pull it, don't pull that stitch super tight. Just kind of make it very nice and comfortable. So I'm going to knit 3 stitches with the white. 3 stitches with the white. Okay. And I'm going to pick up my orange. And I'm going to knit 3 stitches with my orange. And this is how I like to do it. I like to hold both colors. I carry my yarn in my left hand when I knit. And so I like to hold both colors in my left hand, and then I can choose which color I'm going to knit with. Just kind of spread these out on your needle so that way they've got plenty of room. And now I'm going to knit with the white. I'm not pulling it tight. I'm letting that float have room to expand a little bit. So I'm going to knit with my 3 white. And then I'm going to knit with 3 orange. My yarn was split there. I'm just going to let that go down. And then knit with 3 white. And you can see that's really all there is to Fair Isle knitting, is you're just changing the color. And the main thing you need to remember is you need to manage these floats in the back. And this comes with practice, but you want to make sure that you're leaving enough slack in those floats so that it's comfortably resting right behind those stitches and everybody has enough room to kind of expand and look nice. Now you don't want like extra slack. So let me do one with a lot of extra slack. So you don't want it to look like this either though, because if you get a lot of extra slack in it like that, where it's a loop, what's going to happen is that slack will end up working into these stitches and they will end up getting really loose and they'll look a lot bigger than your other stitches. So they'll become kind of prominent. And if let's say you're making a sweater or something or whatever you're making, if something gets caught on this after it's finished, like you catch your finger in it, or you might catch a ring or a bracelet in it, and before you realize it, you've pulled it really tight and you're going to end up, really distorting the way it looks on the front. So you just want to make sure that you're having nice, even floats that aren't too tight or too loose. And believe it or not, it comes with practice and it's not so hard to accomplish. So you just kind of want to have a light hand. Don't pull your work tight, just kind of let it have a light hand. Before you change colors, kind of spread them out on your needle just a little bit, maybe pull them down to just kind of help things to relax, and then go to the next color. Any questions about anything we've covered so far? And that's how I do it. I'm going to show you a couple other ways to hold your yarn, but I want to rest here for a minute and see if there are any questions. Make sure you're seeing things clearly.
How many stitches would you say you could knit in a single color before you have to sort of catch that float along the back?
That's kind of a controversy. You'll get a lot of different answers about that. True, like Fair Isle, if people like from the Fair Isles of Scotland, I think they don't go more than 3. I think they're pretty strict about their rules. I think they do either 2 or 3. They don't go more than 2 or 3. I will go up to 5. I don't go more than 5. And then you start to get a float that's too long. And then what you want to do at that point is, if you did have to go 10, like if you were making a picture or something, so what you would do is you just twist your yarn, your colors like that, nothing fancy, you just twist them, and then you continue knitting. So I need to knit, I'm going to do 3 more, and then I need to do it again. So I'm going to twist these again to lock them in place, and we'll see what that looks like. And I'm going to knit a couple of more. But for true Fair Isle, you shouldn't go more than like 5 would be the most, or you're not going to be knitting like a true traditional Fair Isle. So I knitted a lot of stitches with the orange. So like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 stitches. But I'm not getting really long floats because when I twisted it, that orange yarn twisted around the white yarn and kind of locks it in place. And so that kind of holds things so you don't end up with a really, really long float. Now, if let's just, for the sake of argument, say you were knitting like a big square, like it was going to be a house or something, and you needed to have like maybe 5 or 6 or 10 rows of solid orange. You wouldn't want to twist and catch your float always on the same place. If you do, I've noticed it tends to show up on the front a little bit more. So if you kind of stagger that from row to row, if that's what's going on, it will look a little bit better on the front of your work. Any other questions?
Can you just show again what it looks like when you are catching the unused color? How do the yarns twist together?
Okay, so I just twist them like this. I just take the white and just twist it behind the orange. And then knit. And if you're really paying attention to what you're doing, then the next time you do it, instead of going like, you can take it the other direction. And what will happen is your yarn won't get twisted up as much. Then you're twisting it and untwisting it. But if you look on the back then, let me find where we just did that. See, it's here, it's just twisted around. It's just twisted, or it's very subtle. You wouldn't even notice it if you weren't like specifically looking for it. So you see like right here, you can see that it's just traveling through that kind of like a loop of orange. It's just kind of traveling through it. And right here, the white is just kind of going through it. Right here. Okay. Any other questions? Anything else?
Do you have any idea how many stitches you have on your needle?
Not for this. This is just a practice swatch. I'm just cast on for practice. Okay.
Could you show how to hold, how you hold the two colors, and then some other ways you might hold two colors at once?
Absolutely. That was the next thing I wanted to talk about. So think about how you normally knit. How do you normally hold your yarn? This is how I do. I usually knit with holding my yarn in my left hand. So if I were just knitting with one color, I would be knitting like this. So if I'm going to knit with two colors, I hold them like this, and it's very easy to just switch back and forth, whatever I want. If you're holding your yarn in your right hand, which I do not do, so this is not going to look very nice, you can just kind of do it like this. However you normally, wrap your yarn. And it takes a little practice. And if I were going to do much fair owl knitting with my right hand, I would have to do a lot of practice to get it right. Or some people like to hold one color in one hand and one color in the other hand, and you can knit like this. And sometimes I'll start out doing this, and then when I get to the end of the round, I end up with both of them back in my left hand because that's where they're most comfortable. So you can just, if you're just taking your time and you're not in a hurry, you can just drop the color you're not using. Like you can knit, I'm going to knit a couple with the white, and then I'm going to pick up the orange and knit with the orange. But this is not a very efficient way. And then I'm going to pick the white up, knit with that. So you can kind of do it whatever is going to be the most comfortable in your hand. One thing I will caution you about is if, say, you're holding your yarn like this, you can see the white is on top and the orange is on bottom. And if you like work your project halfway like this, and then you change it, so now the orange is on the top and the white is on the bottom, that will change the way your design looks. So one color becomes more dominant and one color it falls to the background, is not as seen as much. So if you change it like halfway through your project, maybe you want to do that on purpose because you wanted to kind of create a striping effect. But you want to make sure you know what you're doing and what's happening, because that will affect the way it looks. I think the color on top is the one that is actually a little bit more dominant. Is that correct, Claire?
Yes, the color on top will be more dominant.
Yes, you just don't
want to
like,
make a difference.
It makes more of a difference than you think. I've seen hats where people have done it like one hat with one way and one hat the other way, and it's actually quite extreme. So it might seem really subtle and not important, but it's actually quite, just make sure you're focusing on that. So any questions on managing your floats or catching your floats or wrapping your yarn, anything like that? Do we have any questions?
I was going to say, I know we did a bit about, knitting so that the outside is facing you. But one thing I like to do when I knit Fair Isle is I actually knit it inside out on purpose. So that way my floats are going around the outside of the work and I feel like they're just that tiny bit longer.
You taught me that. I do that too, Claire, because you told me about that. So if you are knitting and right here is the front of, it doesn't really look much different when you're actually making it. But what you do, so this is the front of my work right here where I'm looking. If you turn your work inside out, so still right here where I'm looking is still going to be the front of my work. But the wrong side of my work is out here now. And if you think about the circumference of a circle, if you were to measure this hat and go on the outside, and if you were to measure this hat and go on the inside, then the inside, of course, is going to be slightly smaller. So if you are directing your floats so that they're going on the outside like this, then they're going to be slightly looser. So if you're having trouble with tight floats, this might be one way to help. And it's very subtle. Now, if you decide you don't like it, look how easy it is to switch back. So now I've switched back. I've just turned it the other way. And now my floats are floating on the inside. So it's a very, very subtle difference, but it can make a big, it can add to your work and help you solve that problem of the tight float. Anything else? So how about changing colors? Do we feel good about changing colors like this? Okay, no questions?
Nope, we're good to move on.
Perfect. So here is the pattern for the hat that I was showing, the red and white hat that I was showing at the beginning of class. And for this hat, you're going to have to know how to knit two together. So I quickly want to show you that to make sure you know how to knit two together. Here on my practice swatch, show you. So again, this hat, this swatch that I'm working on here is just practice. This is not the actual real hat. So for knitting, I'm sorry, it's knit front and back. So K, F, and B is knit front and back. And what that does is that creates a new stitch, that adds a new stitch. So you're going to start a stitch just like normal. Then you're going to stop here. You're going to swing that around to the back, and you're going to pick up the back leg of that same stitch, the back loop. You're going to bring it through and then transfer it over. And what happens is that one stitch was now made into two stitches. So that is an increase by one. And I'm just going to one stitch just there. So I'll show you one more time. You enter the stitch, wrap your yarn, bring it through. You stop right here for a second, swing that to the back, find the back leg of that same stitch, go through it, and then knit like normal, transfer it over. And what's going to happen is you're going to end up with these little bumps. They almost look like pearl bumps. And that means that you did it correct. People sometimes feel like, oh, I've done something wrong because I've got that little bump. But that's actually telling you that you did it correct. So you're going to need to know how to do a knit front and back to do this hat. So any questions about knit front and back? Pretty easy. So I do want to jump ahead because knitting a chart is actually something that might be new to you. You might not have ever knitted a chart before. So whenever you're looking at a chart, you want to look at the legend or the key and see what's happening. This is going to tell you what colors to use. And of course, you can use whatever colors you like. Some other information that's very important. It's telling us this is a 4-stitch repeat. So this is a 4-stitch repeat, and it's repeating these same 4 stitches over and over again. So what you're going to be doing is you're going to be repeating these same 4 stitches maybe 20 times around your hat, depending on how many stitches you've cast on. So the first one of the chart is just knitting all white. So that's really easy. So you just knit around all white. And then the second row of the chart, so how do you know? You start right here because this is where the number 1 is. And so you go all the way across, and because you're knitting in the round, you'll come back to here and then you start row 2. They just didn't put every row. They didn't number them. So you'll start row 2, you'll go all the way around and come back to row 3. Now, if you're having a hard time keeping track of where you are in the chart, then you can use a Post-it note to kind of help keep track of where you are. And then let's say you're up here and you have to go do something and then come back maybe tomorrow and finish, then you'll know that's where I start. And if you're having a really hard time of kind of keeping your eye in the right place, you can block out everything except the row you're working on with a Post-it note above it and below it. And then every time you glance over, it'll just be like brown, like gray, 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 white, gray, 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 white. Now this chart's really simple, so you might not have a hard time with keeping track, but some charts can be more complicated. And so for future projects, this Post-it note trick might really come in handy, but it is nice to block out the one you've already done. So that way you always know where you are. You might get pulled away from your project and not realize you're going to, and then when you come back, you'll know exactly where you were working. So any questions about reading this chart? It's pretty simple. I don't want to skip anything if anyone has questions though. Anything I missed, Claire?
I was just going to double confirm that when you're working in the round, you're always reading the chart from right to left versus
Yes.
when you're working in the flat, working flat.
I wish, and I feel like they should have, because of that reason, put the numbers here, at least 1, 2, 3, 4, at least, to really emphasize the fact that you're always starting on this side. You're always starting here. Knitting a chart flat is a little different, but I'm not going to talk about that because I don't want to confuse the issue. But knitting in the round, because you're always coming from the same direction, back around, you'll start here, and then you go all the way around, and then you start here. So always from this side when you're knitting in the round. Okay. Now, what I like to do, and this is just what I like to do, is let's pretend I'm at the very beginning and I'm starting. And here is, I have this big stitch marker I'm putting for the beginning of my round. And let's pretend I finished. You don't want to watch me knit, 4 all the way around of white. So I'm going to knit, I'm going to do orange, white, orange, white. So I'm going to do orange, white, orange, white. And now I finished my repeat. And you can see naturally in my hand, I automatically just pull it down a little bit. And that kind of gives everything a little extra slack. And I like to put a stitch marker after I finished every repeat. So I'm going to end up with a stitch marker every 4 stitches, which might seem a little excessive to some people, but that's the way I like to live my life. So, and again, this chart's pretty simple, so you might, it might not seem like it makes much sense to need to do this, but it's a good practice to get into, because if you're knitting a chart that's much more complex, then it's nice to know where your repeats end. And what that will do for me is, now that I've got my repeats all marked off, when I get back around and I start my next row or my next round, if things aren't adding up, if I get to the end and I don't have enough stitches, or if I get somewhere and I think I should be doing, orange, white, and it's not adding up right, I could try to find out where I made that mistake. And because I have my rounds all separated, I can look, I know it's supposed to be orange, white, so I can go back and double check each one. Orange, white, orange, white, orange, white, orange, white. And so I know that I'm right. And I don't have to wonder, did I start here? Did I start, and again, other charts are going to be more complicated. So it won't be quite so straightforward to look at. So I'm trying to help you develop good habits for when you're doing charts that are more complicated. But I really live by a stitch marker. I love a stitch marker. They're there to help you. They're your friends. You don't do this, do you, Claire? You just live on the edge, don't you?
For a pattern like this, I probably wouldn't use stitch markers, but if it's going to be anything more than like 10 stitches, then I might.
Yeah. So just however you want to do it, if you want to use them, you can use them. And if you don't want to, you don't have to. And again, that's one of the best parts about knitting is you can, do whatever, suits you best. Okay, but I do love a stitch marker. Any questions about how to read the chart or anything that we've covered actually at all? Does it seem pretty straightforward?
Pretty straightforward so far. We do have some people saying it's a good tip. Make sure if you're using stitch markers that the one to mark the beginning of the round is different than all the rest.
Yeah, that's why I use this great big one for the beginning one. And if you don't have ones that are, sometimes I'll do this too. I'll put a stitch marker, and then that way I know that that one's the beginning because it'll look different than the rest. Any questions about the tension of the floats? And I feel like that's something that's very important. It just comes with practice, really, but I just want to make sure that everybody understands why that's important, because you don't want your stitches to be too tight or your strands to be too tight. Anything else? Any other questions? Okay, I still want to make sure I'm not moving ahead before people have the answers they're looking for. So once you've finished this first chart, so let's go back and look at that first chart we did. And this first chart seems so easy and so simple that you probably feel like it's not going to make that great of a design. But you can see right here, it really makes a pretty design just by changing colors every so often, like every other one, or up here you have, like, it would be like red, white, white, white. And here, white, red, red, red. You're just changing it very subtly, but it all fits together and it creates this wonderful pattern, which is very fun and it's very cheerful. And so once you've finished that chart, then you want to remove all your stitch markers except for the first one marking your beginning, because you're ready to start this new chart. Now this chart, when I first saw this chart, a chart like this, I thought, what in the world is happening? What did you think, Claire, when you first saw something like this? I thought that can't make any sense. What's happening?
You're right. I'm going to have holes in my knitting.
I just didn't even know. Like when I got to here, I was like, I didn't even know what they were expecting. But what it's demonstrating is this is trying to show you the top of the hat. And so the top of the hat is shaped like a dome. So it gets smaller as it goes up. So you can't like demonstrate that on a two-dimensional flat surface very well. So this was the answer. How do we demonstrate that? And I cut out the chart. And if you kind of fold the chart and kind of get rid of those empty spaces, let's see if I can do this. You get rid of those empty spaces, you'll see it kind of creates a dome. So it kind of creates this curved dome shape because we're getting rid of those empty spaces. And that's what it's trying to represent. So it's kind of an abstract kind of an idea. So if you kind of picture that kind of forces it to become a curved shape or like a dome if they were all lined up. So that's what it's trying to demonstrate. And you can see you have 20 stitches to start. You'll have 20 stitches on your second row, but then on your third row, you have these empty spaces, or I'm sorry, I should be saying rounds. I say row, but I should be saying rounds. On your third round, you have these empty spaces where there's no block. So each one of these blocks represents one stitch. And you just do whatever that's telling you. So this is telling you to use, with my hat, it was telling me to use red and white, red, white. So I'm just knitting all along with those. You get to this one where there's no block. So what do? You do nothing and you skip to the next one. Now, why is there a picture of a little bird's foot in that one? Like that, that's silly, right? Isn't that a silly thing? So we're going to get down here to our key and we're going to look and see what that means. And that is an SK2P. That sounds crazy. So what we're going to do is figure that out together. So we're going to slip one as if to knit, and then we're going to knit two together, and then we're going to pass the slip stitch over, and that will be a decrease by 2. So we're decreasing 2 stitches. So each one of these little steps seems pretty easy. Seems pretty easy. So let me see what I'm going to do. I am going to, so I'm here where I look at my work. I have 4 burgundy and 3 white. And so if I look here, I have 4, I'm going to call these burgundy because I've changed color. So I have 4 burgundy and then 1, 2, 3 white. So I must have just finished row 10. I'm moving to row 11. So sometimes I think if I've identified that that's the row that's matching what I've got here, sometimes I'll feel like that's the row I'm on, but that's the row you just finished. So you're ready to go to the next one. So I'm going to do white, burgundy, 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 and then white. So I've knitted my white one. So 3 burgundy, 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 and then a white one. And so you can see that's making my little like shape here smaller. And then you come to this. So you skip all of this empty space. You're just going to go to the next stitch that you have. And that is the little bird foot, which is a SK2P. So I'm going to slip as if to knit. So usually when you slip a stitch, you slip it as if to purl. That's why they're telling you specifically to slip it as if to knit. So you're going to enter that stitch as if to knit and then just slip it over. And what that does is that causes the stitch to twist. And that's going to add a bit of a decorative effect when we're finished. So you slip as if to knit, which is not hard. And then you knit 2 together. Knit 2 together. And then you pass the slip stitch over. So this is almost like a bind off. So you take that slip stitch and it leapfrogs over the knit 2 together and it loops around. And that stitch, the way it's kind of raised and kind of slanted that direction, will create a little decorative effect. I'll show you what that looks like. It almost looks like a little cable. And then I'm going to move on. So I have to knit with white. And then after that, you just continue following the chart. So if we look here on this finished hat, I don't know if it's showing, but you can see these, here's where my SK2P, right here. And you can, hopefully you can see it almost looks like a little cable, but it does give like a decorative texture to it. I don't know if that's showing up, but it's actually quite pretty. Do we want to see that again? Any questions about that? I feel like I should show it again.
I'm going to say we could see it again.
I feel like we're not getting a lot of questions. Don't hesitate to ask questions if you have questions. Okay, so slip as if to knit. So you enter the stitch as if to knit, slip it over. That's easy. We're going to knit 2 together. We're just going to do it 1 step at a time. Knit 2 together. That's easy. And maybe you've not done this part before, but it is almost just like a bind off. You take the slit stitch that you slipped, you stretch it just a bit, it leapfrogs over the knit 2 together, and you let it drop off. And what happens is it loops around that, and it's going to be slanted, leaning towards the left, and it creates that little decorative stitch, and then you just continue on with your chart. And what that's doing for us is I knit my white. I did my my double decrease right here, and then you just pretend the space isn't here, and you just go to the very next stitch and just continue on with what it's asking, with whatever it's asking you to do, and then you finish that repeat, and then now you come back and start here again. You go all the way around, and you finish that repeat, and you just keep doing that until you get back to the very beginning, and then you move up to the next one. Now, the next one, you want to read it very carefully. It's almost the same as the row below it, except there's no decrease. You want to make sure you're only doing the decrease every other round until you get to the last 2, and then there's 2 right in a row. But you want to just double check the chart and make sure you're reading the chart carefully. This is a situation, though, where I feel like it would be very, very beneficial to put a stitch marker at the end of each round, the end of each repeat. So every 20 stitches, I would put a stitch marker. And then that way, if I made a mistake somewhere, it's easy to go back and try to figure out where you made that mistake. And for a big chart like this, I kind of break it up in my mind a little bit. I kind of think of it, this is one half, this is the other half, and then there's the center. So it's very symmetrical. It's almost like a mirror image of each other. So I'll do the first half, and I might even put an alternate stitch marker here. Like I might put like all red ones or all maybe different shaped one in the middle. So that way, when I know I get to the middle, I can double check and make sure everything was right, because you want to find the mistake here. You don't want to find it like 3 or 4 rows back. Do your decrease and then do the next group of stitches, and then you finished that round. And then you can double check and make sure everything's matching up, double check for any mistakes, and then move on to the next set of repeat. That's just the way I like to think of it. So we all look at things and think of things in different ways. So that's just kind of my take on it. What do you think of that, Claire? Would you use stitch markers in this situation?
In this situation, I would, yes.
Would you probably wouldn't put the one in the center, though? That's kind of extra caution for me.
Yeah, that's kind of extra caution. And after you've got a few rounds of decreases, it's easy to see if they're lining up or not.
Yeah, because you'll start to see them. It's very prominent and decorative. So you do once you start really seeing it, then I might take that stitch marker away, but I like to kind of keep track of where I'm going. So any questions about this chart or anything we've covered yet?
Someone wants to ask, would a lifeline be of any help in this situation?
Actually, this is a perfect situation for a lifeline. I really don't use lifelines. I feel like I should, as cautious as I like to be about things, but this would be the perfect situation for a lifeline, because if you do make a mistake, you can rip it out and it'll protect what happened before. So I just want to quickly share this. This is a different pattern, but it's basically the same. It's the top of a hat. And you can choose which one you want to do. And so, as we saw before, if you take this center bit out, it creates this dome shape. That's when I tried to fold this paper to demonstrate that. So that's what that's showing you. This first one makes a lot more sense to me. It's presented in a way that I can understand very easily, because these triangles, if you fit a bunch of triangles together, you're going to create like a pie shape, right? So you can create your dome just as easy with triangles. And here, what you're getting, basically, if once you get your repeats, you're getting triangles. So instead of dividing the pattern into repeats, like from here to here, which creates this one, I would rather divide, I wish the person designing the chart would divide it this way. So you're creating this triangle, and that makes a lot more sense to me. I don't know how you guys feel about it. And then they just have you do your center decrease here. That's just me. So, I mean, but I wanted you to make sure that you understood that there are different ways of presenting the same information. So if you're expecting to see a chart like this and you're like, wait a minute, why is it like this? It's basically the same information presented in different ways. Okay, anything to add, Claire?
I think that's okay. We did have a request to go over round 6 again.
6. Which of the chart, or what was that?
The decrease chart, I believe.
So why was round 6 particularly questionable?
I am not sure.
So you're going to start with your dark color. So in my case, start with red. So red, white, white, and then red, 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 red. You could do a twist here if you wanted to catch your float, but for 4, I probably wouldn't. So do red, red, red. You're going to do white, white, white. So you're just going to skip over these spaces, do white, 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 and then continue on. And then for row 7, you're going to follow the chart information for the color, and you're going to skip this empty space, go right here to the little bird foot, and that's where you're going to do your double decrease, and then you're going to move on to the next group of stitches. Is that, I'm not sure, what was there a specific question about row 6?
There was not, no.
Does that answer it? Hopefully that answers it. All right, so that's pretty much it. I do want to talk a little bit about finishing. So for finishing a tam, so once it's finished, you can wear it just like this, just like a normal kind of like ski cap or stocking cap. Be super cute if you put like a pom-pom on the top of it. I didn't, because I didn't want to take away, I wanted you to be able to see how it's shaped at the top. But traditionally a tam is kind of shaped like a beret. So if you just take it around a dinner plate, so what you want to do is soak this in water, and it might be a nice time to wash it, put some wool wash or some gentle cleanse, some gentle soap or something. Rinse it, blot it dry in a towel so that it's mostly dry. You want to be very gentle, and then stretch it around a plate and let it dry overnight until it's completely dry. And then when you take it off, it's going to be shaped kind of like more like a beret. So you're going to get a different shape. Make sure it's on here nice and symmetrical and spaced out nice. You don't want it to be, goofy, and then that way. But that's just a different way to style it. And then you can put a pom-pom on it, a nice big one, or maybe a little small one. That'd be really cute. So I think we're about out of time. Do we have any other questions? This is just another little Fair Isle design. So maybe we'll want to switch back to the view of my face. So this is not Fair Isle, this is more stranded knitting. So Fair Isle only has 2 colors in the row, and it's worked up more in stripes. But research the differences between Fair Isle and stranded knitting. It's very interesting. And then here's another sweater I made. And you can see it's very simple techniques, but you can really get a very dramatic look by changing the colors like that. So any other questions, last minute questions as we're leaving? How we doing, Claire?
I think we're doing good. Oh, we do have a question to see the inside of the hat.
Perfect.
And then as you're showing that, I'll go ahead and put the handout in the class or in the chat again and remind everybody that this was being recorded. So it'll be up on the Michaels YouTube channel in about 24 hours and then on michaels.com/classes about 24 hours after that.
Because there's so much information and I plow through it so fast, I always feel like I probably forgot something important. So if you do come across any questions or anything you need further explanation on, feel free to contact me either on Instagram. On Instagram, my screen name is Mr. Woolly Bear. It's M-I-S-T-E-R spelled out, Mr. Woolly Bear. Maybe Claire will put that in the chat. And on Facebook, you can just search my name. It's just Darren Morris, just spelled out. You'll see my picture. Send me a direct message with any questions you have concerning the class. And I don't usually get very many questions, so I'm able to answer them pretty quick. And that way, if maybe I didn't explain something clear enough, that way you can always get more information. So don't hesitate to. And if you make a hat or make anything and you post it online, tag me in it. I'd love to see. So, all right, don't forget to practice. Thanks for coming to class. Have a good night, everyone.